The fluorescent lights hummed overhead as Marcus Chen pushed his maintenance cart down the empty hospital corridor, the wheels squeaking softly against the polished linoleum. 3 in the morning was always the quietest hour, when the building settled into an almost peaceful rhythm broken only by the distant beeping of monitors and the occasional footsteps of night shift nurses. His shoulders ached from the long shift, and his mind was already drifting toward home, where Emma and Sophie would be sleeping soundly in their shared bedroom. At 12 and 8, his daughters had learned to manage their evening routines without him during his late shifts, though he always called to check in and help with homework before their bedtime. Marcus gathered his supplies one final time, checking that everything was secure in the cart. The parking garage would be nearly empty now, just a few cars belonging to the skeleton crew that kept the hospital running through the night. He thought about the morning ahead, how he would need to have breakfast ready before the girls woke up, help them prepare for school, and somehow catch a few hours of sleep before his next shift began. The elevator descended to the parking level with a mechanical whir, and Marcus stepped out into the dimly lit concrete space. His footsteps echoed as he walked toward his aging Honda Civic, parked in the farthest corner where the monthly passes were cheapest. The air was thick with the smell of motor oil and exhaust fumes trapped in the enclosed space. Something was wrong. A figure lay crumpled between two cars, motionless in the harsh glow of the overhead security light. Marcus quickened his pace, his heart rate accelerating as his eyes adjusted to make out more details. A woman, probably in her 30s, wearing expensive-looking clothes that were now torn and dirty. Her dark hair was matted with blood, and her breathing was shallow and irregular. Marcus knelt beside her, his mind automatically shifting into assessment mode as years of medical training surfaced despite the maintenance uniform he now wore. Her pulse was weak but steady, and there was a significant head injury that needed immediate attention. She was unconscious but alive, and every second mattered. He pulled out his phone and dialed 911, speaking quickly and clearly to the dispatcher while keeping his eyes on the injured woman. But even as he waited for the ambulance, Marcus knew that moving her upstairs to the emergency department would be faster than waiting for paramedics to navigate the parking garage and assess the situation. The decision came naturally, born from years of making split-second choices in high-pressure situations. Marcus carefully lifted the woman, supporting her head and neck as he had been trained to do long ago in a different life, when he wore scrubs instead of maintenance coveralls and people listened to his medical opinions with respect. Marcus carried the unconscious woman through the automatic doors of the emergency department, his movements careful and deliberate despite the urgency of the situation. The bright lights and antiseptic smell hit him immediately, along with the familiar sounds of medical equipment and hushed conversations between staff members. Nurse Jennifer Walsh looked up from her computer terminal, her expression shifting from routine boredom to sharp attention as she saw Marcus approaching with the injured woman in his arms. Her eyes quickly scanned his maintenance uniform, and something skeptical flickered across her face before she pressed the call button for immediate assistance. "We have a trauma coming in," she announced to the room, but her gaze lingered on Marcus with unmistakable suspicion. "What happened here?" she asked, her tone carrying an edge that suggested she was already forming conclusions about his involvement. Marcus gently placed the woman on the stretcher that had been wheeled over by an orderly, ensuring her head remained properly supported. "I found her in the parking garage about 10 minutes ago," he explained calmly. She was unconscious between two cars on level B2. Head trauma, possible concussion, pulse is weak but steady at approximately 70 beats per minute. Dr. Sarah Kim emerged from behind a curtained area, pulling on latex gloves as she approached. The attending physician was known for her thoroughness, but Marcus noticed how her eyes also registered his uniform before focusing on the patient. "Sir, I need you to step back now," she said firmly. "We can handle this from here." "The paramedics should be arriving soon," Marcus continued, ignoring the dismissive tone. "I called 911 before bringing her up, but I thought time was more critical than waiting for transport. Her pupils were responsive when I checked, but there was significant bleeding from the scalp laceration." Dr. Kim paused in her examination, glancing up at Marcus with surprise. "You checked her pupils?" she asked, and Marcus nodded. Something in her expression softened slightly, though the professional barrier remained firmly in place. Thank you for your help, but we need to focus on treatment now, Dr. Kim said, her voice gentler but still dismissive. Nurse Walsh will take your statement about where you found her. Marcus stepped back as requested, watching the medical team work with practiced efficiency. He could see from their movements and the equipment they were selecting that they were competent professionals, but part of him wanted to mention the slight irregularity in the woman's breathing pattern that suggested possible internal injuries beyond the obvious head trauma. The security guard, Officer Martinez, approached with a clipboard and pen. I need to get some information about what happened, he said, his tone neutral but watchful. Did you see anyone else in the parking garage tonight? Marcus provided a detailed account of finding the woman, answering each question thoroughly while keeping one eye on the medical team's progress. He noticed Dr. Kim ordering additional tests, which suggested she was being appropriately cautious about potential complications. You work here in maintenance, Officer Martinez confirmed, making notes on his report. How long have you been employed at the hospital? 3 years now, Marcus replied. Night shift, primarily building maintenance and equipment support. I was finishing my rounds when I found her. The injured woman stirred slightly on the stretcher, making soft sounds that might have been attempts at speech. Marcus instinctively moved closer, but Nurse Walsh quickly blocked his path with an outstretched arm. Sir, please maintain distance from the patient, she said sharply. Only medical personnel are allowed in the treatment area. Marcus nodded and stepped back again, understanding the protocols even as frustration simmered beneath his calm exterior. The woman's movements suggested she might be regaining consciousness, which was an encouraging sign for her prognosis. 3 hours later, Marcus wheeled his cart past the VIP wing where the most exclusive patients received treatment. Through the reinforced glass doors, he could see the luxurious rooms that looked more like hotel suites than medical facilities. Leather recliners, flat-screen televisions, and windows overlooking the city skyline created an atmosphere designed to make the wealthy feel comfortable while they healed. He was replacing towels in the adjacent supply closet when he heard the soft sound of crying. Marcus paused, listening. The sound came again, muffled but unmistakably that of a child trying not to be heard. His heart clenched as memories of Lily's quiet sobs after her mother's funeral flooded back. Setting down his supplies, Marcus moved toward the sound. Through a partially open door, he saw a small girl in a wheelchair, her back turned to him. She had long dark hair like her mother's, and she was holding a tablet in her lap, but her shoulders shook with suppressed tears. The girl looked up as a shadow fell across the doorway. Her eyes were large and dark, maybe 8 years old, with the kind of sadness that children should never have to carry. She quickly wiped her face with the back of her hand. I am sorry, she said quietly, her accent carrying a slight Spanish inflection like her mother's. I did not mean to be loud. Marcus glanced down the hallway, then stepped just inside the doorway. You were not loud at all, he said gently. I only heard because I was right outside. Are you Sophia? The girl nodded, then looked down at her legs covered by a soft blue blanket. The doctors, they keep saying I will get better, but it has been so long. Mama spends all her money trying to help me, but nothing changes. Marcus felt the familiar ache in his chest, the same feeling he got when Lily asked why other children had 2 parents and she only had 1. Sometimes healing takes time, he said carefully. Sometimes it happens in ways we do not expect. Sophia's tablet slipped from her lap toward the floor. Marcus caught it smoothly, his reflexes still sharp from years of medical training. As he handed it back, he noticed what she had been looking at. Videos of children dancing, running, playing soccer. Dreams of movement captured in pixels and light. You like to dance? He asked. Before, yes. Sophia's voice was barely a whisper. Mama says maybe someday I will dance again, but I think she is just being nice. The famous doctors, they use big words I do not understand, but their faces tell me the truth. Marcus knelt beside her wheelchair, bringing himself to her eye level. His voice was soft but certain. I have learned that faces can lie just as much as words can. Sometimes the people who know the most forget that every person is different. Every situation is unique. Sophia studied his face with the intensity that only children possess. You are not a doctor, are you? You are the man who brings the clean towels. That is right. But sometimes the people who bring clean towels see things differently than the people who wear white coats. A voice echoed from down the hallway. Sophia? Where are you, mi amor? Sophia straightened in her wheelchair. That is Mama. She worries when she cannot see me. Marcus stood and moved back toward the doorway. It was nice to meet you, Sophia. Remember what I said about healing happening in unexpected ways. Elena Vasquez appeared in the hallway, her designer heels clicking against the marble floor. She wore a different outfit than this morning, but the same exhaustion shadowed her eyes. When she saw Marcus near Sophia's room, her expression became guarded. Is everything all right? Elena asked, her tone polite but protective. Yes, Mama, Sophia said quickly. The towel man was just being nice because I dropped my tablet. Marcus nodded respectfully to Elena. Your daughter is very brave, he said simply, then continued pushing his cart down the hallway. Behind him, he heard Elena's voice, soft and questioning. What did he say to you, mi amor? Sophia's response followed him as he walked away. He said healing happens in ways we do not expect, Mama. Do you think that is true? Marcus did not hear Elena's answer, but as he turned the corner, he carried with him the image of a little girl who still dreamed of dancing, and a mother who would move mountains to make those dreams possible again. In his pocket, his phone buzzed with another text from Mrs. Patterson. Lily wants to know if you will help her practice ballet when you get home. He smiled despite everything. Sometimes the universe had a sense of timing that defied explanation. Dr. Patricia Hawthorne's heels clicked against the linoleum with sharp precision as she approached the treatment area, her expression stern and businesslike despite the early morning hour. As head of hospital administration, she had been called in regarding the incident involving an unidentified patient and a maintenance worker, and her demeanor suggested she was not pleased about being awakened at this hour. Mr. Chen, she said crisply, her voice cutting through the ambient noise of the emergency department. I need to speak with you about tonight's events. Her eyes swept over his maintenance uniform with barely concealed disapproval, and Marcus could sense the assumptions already forming in her mind. Elena, still lying on the examination table but now more alert thanks to the 4 fluids, watched the interaction with growing awareness. Even through her lingering headache and confusion, she could perceive the tension in the air and the way Dr. Hawthorne's tone immediately placed Marcus in a defensive position. I understand you found Ms. Williams in the parking garage, Dr. Hawthorne continued, consulting her tablet with exaggerated attention to detail. That's quite a coincidence, isn't it? A maintenance worker just happening to discover an injured woman during his shift. Marcus kept his expression neutral, recognizing the implied accusation in her carefully chosen words. I was completing my final rounds when I heard what sounded like someone in distress, he explained calmly. I investigated and found her unconscious between 2 vehicles on level B2. And you immediately moved her, Dr. Hawthorne pressed, her eyebrows raised skeptically. Without waiting for emergency medical services. That's not typical protocol for someone without medical training. Elena felt a surge of indignation on Marcus's behalf, though she was careful not to show it. She could see how Dr. Hawthorne was painting Marcus as either incompetent or potentially involved in her injury, and neither assumption seemed fair given how gently and knowledgeably he had handled her care. The woman was in immediate distress, Marcus replied, his voice remaining steady despite the obvious hostility in Dr. Hawthorne's questioning. Moving her to the emergency department seemed more prudent than leaving her alone in a parking garage while waiting for an ambulance to arrive. Dr. Hawthorne made notes on her tablet, each tap of her stylus seeming deliberately loud and disapproving. And you felt qualified to make that medical judgment because, she asked, letting the question hang in the air like an accusation. Marcus glanced toward Elena, who was listening intently despite her condition. Because human life has value, and leaving someone injured and alone seemed wrong, he said simply. The medical staff here are highly qualified to provide proper treatment, which she needed immediately. The response caught Dr. Hawthorne off guard, and she looked up from her tablet with surprise. Elena noticed how Marcus had deflected the attack on his qualifications while simultaneously complimenting the hospital staff, showing both humility and diplomatic skill that seemed inconsistent with his supposed background. Dr. Kim approached the group, having finished reviewing Elena's latest test results. "The patient is stable and responding well," she reported to Dr. Hawthorne. "Her neurological signs are improving, and we've confirmed there are no signs of serious internal bleeding." "That's fortunate," Dr. Hawthorne replied, though her attention remained focused on Marcus. "Mr. Chen, I'll need you to complete a full incident report before you leave tonight. And in the future, please remember that hospital protocol requires you to call security immediately in situations like this rather than taking independent action." Marcus nodded respectfully, though Elena could see the slight tightening around his eyes that suggested frustration with the bureaucratic response to his act of kindness. "Of course," he said. "I'll complete the paperwork before I clock out." Elena watched him turn to leave, noting the quiet dignity in his posture even under Dr. Hawthorne's scrutiny. There was something about Marcus Chen that didn't add up, and she found herself increasingly curious about the man who had saved her life while asking for nothing in return. The afternoon sun filtered through the hospital room windows as Elena slowly adjusted to her surroundings, the throbbing in her head having subsided to a manageable ache. She had been moved to a private room for observation, and the steady stream of nurses checking her vitals had given her time to think about the events of the previous night and the maintenance worker who had saved her life. When visiting hours began, Elena was surprised to see two young girls peering around the doorframe with curious expressions. The older one, perhaps 12 years old, had long dark hair and intelligent eyes that reminded Elena of someone, though she couldn't quite place who. The younger girl, maybe 8, clutched a small stuffed animal and seemed more hesitant about entering the room. Elena watched as Marcus appeared behind them, still wearing his maintenance uniform from the day shift. His face lit up with genuine warmth as he spoke to his daughters, and Elena realized this was the first time she had seen him truly smile. "Girls, remember what we talked about," Marcus said gently. "We're just checking to see how Sarah is feeling today, and then we'll head home for homework time." Emma, the older daughter, stepped forward with the confidence of someone wise beyond her years. "Are you feeling better?" she asked Elena politely. "Dad said you were hurt and he helped you." Elena felt something unexpected stir in her chest at the simple directness of the question. "Much better, thank you," she replied warmly. "Your father was very kind to me when I needed help." Sophie, the younger girl, moved closer to the bed, her shyness beginning to fade. "Did it hurt a lot?" she asked with the innocent concern that only children could express so purely. "It did hurt," Elena admitted honestly. "But knowing that good people like your dad are around made me feel safer." Marcus watched this exchange with quiet pride, and Elena could see how deeply he loved his daughters. There was something in the way he looked at them that spoke of protection and sacrifice, of a man who had built his entire world around ensuring their happiness and security. "Dad says we should always help people when they're in trouble," Emma said matter-of-factly. "Even if it's hard or scary." Elena glanced at Marcus, seeing him flush slightly at his daughter's words. "What qualities do you think make someone a great parent?" she found herself thinking, watching the gentle way he guided his daughters through this interaction. The question seemed to echo in her mind as she observed the obvious love and respect between father and daughters. "That's a very wise thing your dad taught you," Elena told Emma. "I hope someday I can help someone the way he helped me." Sophie stepped closer to the bed, her stuffed animal tucked securely under her arm. "Dad knows lots of things," she announced proudly. "He helps us with our homework and reads us stories and makes the best pancakes in the world." Marcus chuckled softly, and Elena heard genuine happiness in the sound. The contrast between his treatment by the hospital staff and the clear adoration of his daughters was striking, and she found herself wondering about his story. "We should let Sarah rest now," Marcus said gently to his girls. "She needs to get better so she can go home to her family too." Elena felt a pang at the mention of family, realizing that no one had come looking for her, no one had called to check on her well-being. The loneliness of her chosen isolation hit her more acutely in the presence of Marcus's obvious family bonds. "Thank you for visiting," Elena said to the girls, then looked directly at Marcus. "And thank you again for everything you did. I don't know what would have happened if you hadn't found me." Marcus nodded simply, his humility evident in every gesture. "I'm just glad you're recovering well," he said. "The doctors here are excellent, and you're in good hands." As they prepared to leave, Elena watched Marcus help Sophie with her backpack and remind Emma about her science project deadline. The small domestic details painted a picture of a man completely devoted to his children's well-being, and Elena found herself deeply moved by the obvious love and care in their relationship. The next evening, Elena sat up in her hospital bed feeling significantly better, though the doctors insisted on keeping her one more night for observation. She had spent much of the day thinking about Marcus and his daughters, replaying their brief visit and trying to understand why their interaction had affected her so deeply. When Marcus appeared in her doorway during his dinner break, still wearing his maintenance uniform and carrying a small paper bag, Elena felt an unexpected surge of gratitude mixed with curiosity. She had been hoping he would stop by, though she hadn't been certain he would take the time. "How are you feeling tonight?" Marcus asked, his genuine concern evident in his voice as he stepped into the room. "The nurses said your test results have been encouraging." "Much better, thank you," Elena replied, gesturing toward the visitor's chair beside her bed. "Please, sit for a moment if you have time. I've been hoping to speak with you properly." Marcus settled into the chair, placing the paper bag on the small bedside table. "The girls insisted I bring you something," he said with a slight smile. "Sophie drew you a get-well card, and Emma wrote you a poem about being brave." Elena felt unexpected tears prick at her eyes as she opened the bag to find a hand-drawn card featuring colorful flowers and a carefully written poem about courage and kindness. The simple gestures touched her more deeply than any expensive gift ever had, and she realized how long it had been since anyone had shown her such uncomplicated care. "These are beautiful," she said softly, her voice thick with emotion. "Please tell them how much this means to me." Marcus nodded, pleased by her genuine reaction to his daughter's gifts. "They were worried about you," he said. "Emma especially wanted to make sure you knew that strangers could be good people too." The comment struck Elena as particularly insightful coming from a 12-year-old, and she found herself increasingly curious about the family dynamics that could produce such thoughtful children. Marcus clearly had wisdom and values that he was passing on to his daughters, despite whatever financial struggles they might be facing. "I want to do something to thank you properly," Elena said, reaching for her purse. "What you did for me, staying with me, bringing me here. It was extraordinary, and I'd like to offer you something in return." She pulled out her wallet and extracted several $100 bills, holding them out toward Marcus with sincere appreciation. "Please," she insisted. "For your daughters, for anything they might need." Marcus looked at the money for a long moment, and Elena could see him considering her offer carefully. She expected him to accept gratefully, as most people in his apparent financial situation would naturally do. Instead, he gently pushed her hand back toward her. "That's very generous of you, Sarah," he said quietly. "But helping you wasn't something I did expecting payment. Anyone would have done the same thing in that situation." Elena stared at him in amazement, the bills still extended between them. Most people would have jumped at the opportunity for financial assistance, especially someone working a maintenance job and raising 2 children alone. His refusal wasn't born from pride or stubbornness, but from genuine principle. "But your daughters," Elena pressed. "School supplies, activities, anything they might want or need." Marcus smiled, and Elena saw the depth of love and contentment in his expression despite his modest circumstances. "Emma and Sophie have everything they need," he said simply. "We take care of each other, and that's enough." The sincerity in his voice convinced Elena that he truly meant what he said, and she slowly returned the money to her wallet while studying his face with new fascination. There was more to Marcus Chen than met the eye, and she found herself determined to understand what kind of man would refuse help while clearly struggling financially yet maintain such dignity and peace. The alarm pierced through the quiet evening air of Elena's hospital room with urgent, rhythmic beeping that immediately commanded attention. Elena had been drifting in and out of comfortable sleep when suddenly her vision began to blur and her chest tightened with an alarming sensation she had never experienced before. Marcus was mopping the floor in the adjacent hallway when he heard the monitor alarms activate, followed by Elena's confused and frightened voice calling for help. Without hesitation, he abandoned his cleaning cart and rushed into her room, arriving seconds before the nursing staff could respond to the alert. Elena was sitting up in bed, her face pale and her breathing rapid and shallow. Her hands were pressed against her chest, and Marcus could immediately see the signs of what appeared to be a serious cardiac event developing before his eyes. "I can't breathe properly," Elena gasped, her voice tight with panic. "Something's wrong, something's really wrong." Marcus moved to her bedside with swift precision, his training automatically taking over despite the years that had passed since he had worked in a medical environment. He quickly assessed her color, breathing pattern, and the readout on her cardiac monitor, recognizing the irregular rhythm that indicated a potentially dangerous arrhythmia. "Sarah, I need you to try to slow your breathing," he said calmly, his voice steady and reassuring. "You're having an irregular heartbeat, but we're going to get you through this." Nurse Walsh burst into the room, followed closely by Dr. Kim, both responding to the cardiac alarm with practiced urgency. When they saw Marcus at Elena's bedside, Nurse Walsh immediately moved to push him away from the patient. "Sir, you need to step back right now," she said sharply. "This is a medical emergency and only qualified personnel can assist." Marcus looked at Elena's monitor and saw the rhythm deteriorating rapidly. Her blood pressure was dropping, and the arrhythmia was becoming more pronounced with each passing second. Time was critical, and he knew exactly what needed to be done. "She needs adenosine, 12 milligrams for push, stat," Marcus said firmly to Dr. Kim, his voice carrying the authority of someone who had dealt with similar emergencies countless times. "Her heart rate is approaching 200, and she's showing signs of hemodynamic compromise." Dr. Kim stopped in her tracks, staring at Marcus with complete surprise. The maintenance worker had just delivered a precise medical assessment using proper terminology and dosage specifications that indicated advanced cardiac training. Elena felt her consciousness beginning to fade as her heart hammered irregularly in her chest. Through her growing panic, she heard Marcus's calm voice explaining to Dr. Kim exactly what was happening to her cardiovascular system and why immediate intervention was necessary. "How do you know that?" Dr. Kim asked Marcus urgently, even as she prepared the medication he had recommended. "That's an exact protocol for supraventricular tachycardia." Marcus was already positioning himself to help stabilize Elena if she lost consciousness completely. "I know because I've treated this condition before," he said simply, his focus entirely on Elena's deteriorating state rather than on explaining his background. Dr. Kim administered the adenosine, and within seconds Elena felt her heart rhythm begin to normalize. The crushing sensation in her chest eased, and her breathing became deeper and more regular as the medication took effect. Elena looked up at Marcus with wonder and gratitude, seeing him clearly for the first time. This was not just a kind maintenance worker who had happened to find her in the parking garage. This was someone with extensive medical knowledge who had just diagnosed her condition faster than the attending physician and recommended the exact treatment that saved her from a potentially fatal cardiac episode. Dr. Hawthorne arrived at Elena's room within minutes of receiving the report about the cardiac emergency, her expression thunderous as she surveyed the scene. Elena was now stable and breathing normally, but the administrator's attention was focused entirely on Marcus, who stood quietly near the window while Dr. Kim completed her post-emergency documentation. "Mr. Chen," Dr. Hawthorne said with barely controlled anger, "I need to speak with you immediately about what happened here tonight." Her voice carried the sharp edge of authority being challenged, and Elena could sense the confrontation that was about to unfold. Marcus turned to face her calmly, his hands clasped behind his back in a posture that Elena recognized as respectful but unrepentant. "Of course, Dr. Hawthorne," he replied evenly. "I'm happy to discuss the situation." "You completely overstepped your role as a maintenance employee," Dr. Hawthorne declared, her voice rising slightly. "Providing medical advice and interfering with emergency treatment protocols is absolutely unacceptable and potentially dangerous." Elena watched the exchange with growing indignation, her newfound clarity allowing her to see exactly what was happening. Dr. Hawthorne was more concerned with maintaining institutional hierarchy than acknowledging that Marcus had quite possibly saved her life with his quick thinking and expertise. "Furthermore," Dr. Hawthorne continued, "you could face serious consequences for practicing medicine without a license. This kind of behavior jeopardizes not only patient safety but also exposes the hospital to significant liability issues." Marcus remained silent, allowing the administrator to voice her concerns without interruption. Elena could see the restraint in his posture, the way he absorbed the criticism without defending himself, and she realized he was protecting something more important than his own reputation. "Dr. Hawthorne," Elena said firmly, her voice cutting through the administrator's tirade. "I think you should know that I was conscious enough throughout my cardiac episode to understand exactly what was happening." The room fell silent as all attention turned to Elena, who had propped herself up in bed with newfound determination. Dr. Hawthorne's expression shifted from anger to surprise, clearly not expecting the patient to insert herself into the disciplinary conversation. "Marcus diagnosed my condition correctly and recommended the exact treatment that Dr. Kim administered," Elena continued with growing strength in her voice. "I heard every word of his assessment, and it was completely accurate. Without his intervention, I believe my condition would have deteriorated significantly before proper treatment could begin." Dr. Kim nodded slowly, her professional integrity compelling her to acknowledge the truth. "The patient is correct," she said to Dr. Hawthorne. "Mr. Chen's assessment was medically sound and his treatment recommendation was precisely what our cardiac protocols require for SVT." Elena saw Marcus's slight surprise at her defense of him, but she pressed on with determination. "I may not remember everything about my accident, but I remember clearly that this man saved my life twice. Once in the parking garage and again tonight in this room." Dr. Hawthorne's anger seemed to deflate slightly in the face of Elena's testimony and Dr. Kim's professional confirmation. However, she maintained her stern expression as she struggled to reconcile what she was hearing with her assumptions about maintenance workers and proper hospital protocols. "Be that as it may," Dr. Hawthorne said stiffly, "there are proper channels and procedures that must be followed. Maintenance staff cannot be permitted to provide medical advice regardless of the outcome." Elena felt her own anger beginning to rise as she watched Dr. Hawthorne's stubborn refusal to acknowledge Marcus's competence and compassion. The administrator seemed more interested in protecting bureaucratic procedures than recognizing genuine expertise and life-saving actions. Elena spent her final night in the hospital unable to sleep, her mind racing with questions about Marcus Chen that demanded answers. Using her phone, she began searching for any information about him, starting with basic online searches that yielded frustratingly little about a maintenance worker at Metropolitan General Hospital. But Elena had resources and investigative skills that came from years of building her technology empire. She expanded her search parameters, looking for any Marcus Chen with medical background in the metropolitan area, and what she discovered left her staring at her phone screen in complete amazement. Dr. Marcus Chen, Ph.D. in Biomedical Engineering from Stanford University. Former lead research scientist at Cardiac Solutions International. Published author of 17 peer-reviewed papers on advanced cardiac monitoring systems. Co-inventor of 3 patents for innovative medical devices that had revolutionized emergency cardiac care. Elena scrolled through academic articles and conference presentations, seeing photographs of a younger Marcus in professional settings, wearing suits and speaking at medical conferences to audiences of distinguished colleagues. The contrast with the humble maintenance worker she had met was so stark it seemed impossible they could be the same person. She found a news article from 4 years ago that made everything suddenly clear. Dr. Marcus Chen, prominent biomedical researcher, had taken an indefinite leave from Cardiac Solutions International following the tragic death of his wife, Dr. Lisa Chen, in an automobile accident. The article mentioned that he was survived by 2 young daughters and had chosen to step away from his research career to focus on family. Elena felt her heart break as she read about the loss that had transformed Marcus's life completely. She understood now why a brilliant scientist was working night shifts in hospital maintenance, why he possessed such advanced medical knowledge, and why his daughters were his entire world. The sacrifice he had made was staggering. Marcus had walked away from a prestigious career, substantial income, and international recognition in order to be present for Emma and Sophie during their most vulnerable time. He had chosen love over ambition, family over professional achievement, and had done so without apparent regret or bitterness. Elena found herself weeping quietly as she read through his published research, recognizing the caliber of mind that was now cleaning floors and emptying trash cans. His work on cardiac arrhythmia detection had been groundbreaking, contributing to systems that had saved thousands of lives worldwide. Yet he had given it all up to read bedtime stories and help with homework. She discovered that Marcus had been offered numerous opportunities to return to research positions, including several consulting roles that would have allowed him flexibility for parenting. Each opportunity had been politely declined, with Marcus citing his commitment to his daughter's stability and well-being as his primary concern. The depth of his sacrifice became even more apparent when Elena found financial records indicating that he had used his savings and retirement funds to pay for his wife's medical treatments and funeral expenses. He had liquidated everything to ensure his daughters could remain in their family home and continue at their schools, choosing their emotional security over his own financial stability. Elena set her phone aside and stared out the window at the city lights, trying to process what she had learned. Marcus Chen was not just a kind maintenance worker who had helped her in her time of need. He was a brilliant scientist who had voluntarily stepped away from everything he had worked for in order to be the father his daughters needed. The realization that such profound sacrifice and humility existed in the world moved Elena in ways she had not expected. She thought about her own life, her wealth, her isolation, and wondered what it would feel like to be loved with such complete devotion as Emma and Sophie were loved by their father. The morning sunlight streamed through Elena's hospital room window as she prepared for discharge, her belongings packed but her mind focused entirely on the conversation she needed to have with Marcus. She had requested that he stop by before she left, claiming she had something important to discuss with him about her recovery. When Marcus appeared in her doorway, looking tired from his night shift but genuinely pleased to see her preparing to go home, Elena felt her carefully planned words suddenly seem inadequate for what she needed to reveal. "Sarah, you look much better this morning," Marcus said warmly, stepping into the room with the same gentle presence that had comforted her since the night he found her. "Are you feeling ready to return to your normal life?" Elena took a deep breath, knowing that everything she was about to say would change the dynamic between them forever. "Actually, Marcus, there's something I need to tell you. Something important about who I really am." Marcus settled into the visitor's chair, giving her his full attention with the same focused care he showed his daughters when they had something serious to discuss. Elena appreciated how he never seemed rushed or distracted, always making others feel heard and valued. "My name isn't Sarah Williams," Elena began, her voice steady despite her nervousness. "I'm Elena Morrison, and I need you to know that I've been living under a false identity for the past several months." Marcus's expression remained calm, though Elena could see surprise and curiosity in his dark eyes. He waited patiently for her to continue, not jumping to conclusions or demanding immediate explanations. "I'm the founder and CEO of Morrison Technologies," Elena continued, watching his face carefully for any sign of recognition. "I built the company from nothing into what it became, but the pressure and constant public attention eventually became overwhelming." The name clicked for Marcus immediately, and Elena saw the moment of recognition in his eyes. Morrison Technologies was a household name, a company worth billions that had revolutionized cloud computing and artificial intelligence. Elena Morrison was one of the youngest self-made billionaires in history, though she had largely avoided public appearances in recent years. "I needed to step away from everything," Elena explained, her voice becoming more vulnerable. "The board meetings, the media attention, the constant demands on my time and energy. I've been living quietly under an assumed name, trying to remember what it feels like to be just a person rather than a public figure." Marcus absorbed this information with the same measured thoughtfulness he applied to everything else, and Elena found herself wondering what it would be like to face difficult choices between career and family responsibilities. Have you ever had to make a difficult choice between career and family? She found herself thinking, remembering her own struggles with isolation despite her success. That explains a lot about your reaction to my offer of money, Marcus said gently, a small smile playing at the corners of his mouth. You're probably used to people wanting something from you because of your wealth. Elena nodded, feeling relief that he understood without judgment. Most people treat me differently when they know who I am, she said. But you helped me when you thought I was nobody special, when there was nothing I could offer you in return. You were never nobody special, Marcus replied quietly. Every person deserves help when they're hurt, regardless of who they are or what they have. Elena felt tears forming in her eyes at the simple sincerity of his words. In a world where people constantly sought her attention for her money and influence, Marcus had shown her genuine kindness based purely on human compassion and moral conviction. Elena stood in the hospital lobby the following afternoon, her discharge papers completed but her mission far from finished. She had asked Marcus to meet her before his shift began, claiming she had a final thank you that couldn't wait. When she saw him approaching in his maintenance uniform, she felt the same sense of profound respect that had been growing since learning about his true background. Marcus, Elena began, her voice carrying a formal tone that immediately caught his attention. I've spent considerable time thinking about our conversations and what I've learned about you over these past few days. Dr. Hawthorne happened to be passing through the lobby at that moment, reviewing charts on her tablet while walking toward the elevator bank. Elena noticed her approach and realized this was the perfect opportunity for what she had planned. I know about your background, Elena continued, speaking clearly enough for Dr. Hawthorne to overhear. I know about your PhD from Stanford, your research at Cardiac Solutions International, and the groundbreaking work you did on arrhythmia detection systems. Marcus's eyes widened with surprise, and Elena saw him glance nervously toward Dr. Hawthorne, who had stopped walking and was now listening intently to their conversation with obvious shock. I also know why you left that career, Elena said gently, her respect for his sacrifice evident in every word. The choice you made to prioritize your daughters after losing your wife shows the kind of character and integrity that is extraordinarily rare in any profession. Dr. Hawthorne moved closer, her tablet forgotten as she processed the revelation that the maintenance worker she had been treating with such disdain was actually a distinguished medical researcher. Her face showed a mixture of embarrassment and disbelief. Elena turned to address Marcus directly, her voice gaining strength and authority as she prepared to make her offer. I want you to know that Morrison Technologies has a medical device division that has been searching for exactly your expertise in cardiac monitoring systems. Marcus looked confused, still not fully understanding where Elena's conversation was leading. He glanced again at Dr. Hawthorne, whose expression had transformed from suspicion to something approaching mortification as she realized the implications of how she had treated him. I'm offering you the position of Chief Innovation Officer for our Medical Technology Division, Elena announced clearly, her words carrying across the lobby. The role would involve leading research teams, developing next-generation cardiac devices, and working with the brightest minds in biomedical engineering. The offer hung in the air like a thunderclap, and Elena watched as Dr. Hawthorne's face went completely pale. The administrator had spent days treating Marcus with condescension and suspicion, questioning his competence and threatening disciplinary action, only to discover that he was more qualified than most of the medical staff she supervised. Elena, Marcus said quietly, clearly overwhelmed by the magnitude of what she was proposing. I'm honored by your offer, but my daughters are my priority. I can't accept a position that would take me away from them or require the kind of travel and hours that executive roles typically demand. Elena smiled, having anticipated exactly this response based on everything she had learned about his character. The position would be entirely flexible, she assured him. Remote work when possible, family-friendly schedules, and full support for your role as a father. Your daughters would always come first. Dr. Hawthorne stepped forward, her professional composure finally cracking as she realized the full scope of her misjudgment. Dr. Chen, she said formally, I believe I owe you a significant apology for my conduct over the past few days. Marcus looked at her with the same calm dignity he had maintained throughout her hostile questioning, and Elena saw no trace of vindictiveness or satisfaction in his expression despite the dramatic reversal of their positions. 3 months later, Marcus stood in his new office at Metropolitan General Hospital, sunlight streaming through windows that overlooked the same parking garage where he had found Elena on that life-changing night. His business cards now read Medical Technology Liaison, a position the hospital had created specifically for him after Elena's generous endowment established a new cardiac research wing. The consulting arrangement with Morrison Technologies had exceeded everyone's expectations. Marcus worked remotely 3 days a week, developing innovative monitoring systems that bridged the gap between cutting-edge technology and practical hospital applications. The remaining 2 days, he served as the hospital's liaison for implementing new medical technologies, ensuring that frontline staff understood and embraced the tools that could save lives. Emma burst into the office with the enthusiasm that only 12-year-olds possessed, her backpack slung over one shoulder and her science fair medal gleaming on her chest. "Dad, Elena's here," she announced proudly. "She wants to see your new laboratory setup." Sophie followed close behind, clutching the same stuffed animal she had carried during their first hospital visit, though now she moved with the confidence of a child whose world had stabilized in wonderful ways. "She said she has something special to show us," Sophie added with excitement. Elena appeared in the doorway, no longer the confused and injured woman from the emergency room but rather the brilliant entrepreneur whose friendship had become one of the most valuable aspects of Marcus's new life. She had resumed her public role gradually, though she maintained the quiet lifestyle that had brought her peace. "I hope you don't mind the interruption," Elena said to Marcus, her smile encompassing both him and his daughters. "I wanted to share some news about the first prototype based on your cardiac monitoring research." Marcus felt pride swell in his chest as Elena explained how his innovations were already being tested in hospitals across the country, potentially saving lives through earlier detection of cardiac events. The work combined his deepest professional passions with his commitment to helping others, all while allowing him the flexibility to be the father Emma and Sophie needed. Dr. Hawthorne passed by the office, pausing to wave respectfully through the glass wall. Her attitude toward Marcus had transformed completely since learning about his background, and she had become one of his strongest advocates within the hospital administration. The change served as a daily reminder about the danger of judging others based on appearances or assumptions. "You know," Elena said thoughtfully as they watched the bustling activity of the hospital below, "I used to think success meant building the biggest company or making the most money. But watching you with your daughters, seeing how you've created this beautiful balance between meaningful work and family, I think you might have figured out something more important." Marcus looked at Emma and Sophie, who were examining the new medical equipment with fascination and asking intelligent questions about how the technology worked. His heart was full in ways that had nothing to do with professional achievement and everything to do with the love and connection that filled his daily life. "Success looks different for everyone," he replied quietly. "For me, it's knowing that my daughters feel safe and loved, and that my work helps other people in some small way." Elena nodded, understanding completely. "If this story has touched your heart in any way," she said warmly, looking directly at Marcus and his daughters, "I hope you'll remember that the most important things in life are often the simplest ones. Family, kindness, and the courage to help others when they need it most." Marcus pulled his daughters close, feeling grateful for the unexpected journey that had brought Elena into their lives and restored his ability to contribute his knowledge to the world while remaining the father he wanted to be. The future stretched ahead with possibilities he had never imagined, built on a foundation of love, sacrifice, and the recognition that every person has hidden depths worth discovering.